Imagine receiving a golden invitation to dine with the Emperor of Rome. Your family name stretches back through generations of honor. Your purple-striped toga marks you as one of the most distinguished senators in the empire. This should be the pinnacle of your career, a moment of pride that will echo through your family's history for centuries to come. But as you climb the marble steps of the Palatine Hill tonight, every instinct in your body screams at you to turn around and run. The Praetorian guards at the entrance refuse to meet your eyes. And that silence tells you everything you need to know about what waits inside those gilded doors. The scent of expensive incense drifts through the air, but it cannot mask the unmistakable smell of fear that clings to these walls like a curse. You enter the great hall where dozens of Rome's most powerful citizens stand in uncomfortable silence. Senators clutch their togas with white-knuckled fists. Their wives stare at the floor. Military commanders who have faced barbarian hordes without flinching now tremble like children in the dark. Then you hear it, footsteps echoing down the corridor accompanied by laughter that makes your blood turn to ice. Emperor Caligula enters dressed in silk that shimmers like molten gold, and his eyes sweep across the room with the hungry gaze of a predator selecting its prey. He claps his hands together with theatrical delight and announces that tonight will be a test of loyalty, a demonstration of just how far Rome's elite will go to prove their devotion to their divine emperor. What happens next will shatter every boundary of Roman decency and transform the sacred halls of imperial power into a stage for humanity's darkest impulses. This is the story of how absolute power became absolute corruption, and how one man's madness infected an entire civilization. Before we descend into these forgotten chapters of survival and terror, if you find yourself drawn to the hidden truths that history tried to bury, consider hitting that like button, and please, leave a comment telling me where you're rewatching from, because it moves me deeply that we reconnected across time and distance by our shared need to understand the darkness that humans are capable of when all restraints are removed. To understand how the most powerful man in the world could transform his palace into a temple of psychological torture and sexual domination, you need to understand the boy who became the monster. Born Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus in the year 12, he earned the nickname Caligula, meaning little boots, when he charmed Roman legions as a child dressed in miniature soldier-esque gear during his father's military campaigns. But there was nothing innocent about growing up in the imperial family. By age 7, Caligula had watched his father die under mysterious circumstances, probably poisoned on the orders of the paranoid Emperor Tiberius. He witnessed his mother and brothers dragged into exile, imprisonment, and eventually death as they became victims of imperial politics and conspiracy. Imagine being a child and knowing that any moment could bring soldiers to your door, that showing weakness meant death, that trust was a luxury no one in your world could afford. Caligula learned to wear masks, to smile while his family was systematically destroyed around him, to appear harmless while plotting his own survival. The trauma that seeped into his bones during those years would later manifest as a compulsive need to dominate and humiliate others, particularly those who represented the power structures that had terrorized his childhood. When Tiberius finally died in the year 37, 24-year-old Caligula ascended to the purple and Rome celebrated with genuine joy. Here was the son of their beloved Germanicus, the boy who once brought smiles to battle-hardened soldiers. After decades under the reclusive and paranoid Tiberius, they were ready for someone young and promising. For 7 months, Caligula seemed to fulfill every hope. He recalled political exiles, showered the Praetorian Guard with bonuses, and held spectacular public games that reminded Romans of their glory days. But then something happened that would transform the imperial palace from a seat of governance into something far more sinister. In late 37, Caligula fell catastrophically ill with what ancient sources describe as a brain fever so severe that it brought the empire to a standstill. For days he hovered between life and death, while all of Rome held its breath and prayed for their young emperor's recovery. When he finally emerged from that fever, those closest to him noticed immediately that something fundamental had changed. Some historians believe the illness caused permanent brain damage. Others argue it simply stripped away the thin veneer of sanity that had been containing his darker impulses. The young man who had shown political wisdom and restraint was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to have lost all connection to the boundaries between sacred and profane, between the permissible and the unthinkable. The transformation wasn't immediately obvious to the Roman public, but behind the closed doors of the imperial palace, a much darker metamorphosis was taking place. Caligula had discovered something during his brush with death, an intoxicating realization that, as emperor, he could do literally anything to anyone, and no one possessed the power to stop him. The palace staff were the first to witness what Caligula had become. Servants who had served the imperial family for decades suddenly found themselves subjected to the emperor's bizarre whims and escalating demands. Young slaves discovered there was no corner of the palace where they were safe from his appetites. At night, the emperor would prowl the corridors selecting victims at random, and the careful language of ancient sources makes clear that these were not consensual encounters but acts of pure domination designed to reinforce his absolute power over every soul within his domain. But Caligula's transformation of the palace went far beyond personal gratification. He understood that true power meant breaking the spirits of Rome's most respected citizens, and he discovered that sexual humiliation was the most effective weapon for destroying the social order that held the empire together. The psychological damage to these families was often irreparable. Marriages destroyed, children traumatized, proud Roman bloodlines reduced to instruments of imperial pleasure. Caligula took particular delight in arranging special seating so that husbands had perfect views of their wives, being forced into acts of submission, and the men's faces, that mixture of rage and helplessness and shame, seemed to provide the emperor with as much satisfaction as the acts themselves. The physical palace itself underwent modifications to accommodate his increasingly elaborate fantasies. One chamber was apparently designed like a small amphitheater with raised seating around a central performance area where the emperor would stage forced encounters, while audiences of senators and their families were compelled to watch and applaud. He established what can only be called a brothel within the palace walls, staffed by the wives and daughters of senators who had fallen from favor. Women forced to service not only the emperor but his guests, foreign dignitaries, and sometimes even common soldiers as the ultimate form of family humiliation. Perhaps most chilling was how Caligula incorporated this degradation into the sacred ceremonies that formed the backbone of Roman civilization. Traditional Senate meetings were perverted when he demanded that senators' wives perform services while their husbands conducted official business. The act of governance became inseparable from humiliation, with Rome's most important political decisions being made while the empire's most powerful men were forced to witness their families' abuse. Religious ceremonies were similarly corrupted as Caligula claimed divine status and demanded that rituals include acts performed in his honor. Women raised in the strict moral codes of Roman aristocracy, taught that virtue was their most precious possession, suddenly found themselves reduced to objects for imperial entertainment. The cognitive dissonance between their upbringing and their forced participation often led to complete psychological collapse. Some attempted to escape through suicide, but Caligula had anticipated this response. Families of women who took their own lives faced collective punishment, execution, or financial ruin that destroyed entire bloodlines across generations. This created an impossible trap where women were caught between personal honor and family responsibility with no choice that did lead to devastation. Even more psychologically destructive was the forced complicity of Roman men. Senators weren't merely passive witnesses but were often required to actively participate in arranging their own family's degradation. Fathers were commanded to personally deliver daughters to the emperor's chambers. Husbands were made to assist in preparing their wives. Brothers helped restrain their sisters. By making these men accomplices in their loved ones' abuse, Caligula destroyed their ability to maintain any sense of honor or authority. A senator who had participated in his own wife's humiliation could never again command the same respect, his moral standing permanently compromised by his complicity. Children were not spared from this corruption. While ancient sources remain deliberately vague, they make clear that the emperor's appetites extended to minors from prominent families. Children forced to witness unspeakable acts suffered psychological trauma that would mark them for life, while some were made to participate themselves. Their innocence destroyed as part of the emperor's campaign to corrupt Roman society at its foundations. These children would grow up to become the next generation of leaders, but they would carry the scars of the palace with them, potentially perpetuating cycles of abuse for decades after Caligula's reign finally ended. As time went on, Caligula formalized his practices into a cult of imperial worship where sexual acts performed in his honor were presented as religious obligations. Temples were established within the palace where anyone seeking favor or simply trying to survive was required to demonstrate devotion through participation. The story of Caligula's palace is not just about one emperor's madness.